My name is Marcus. I'm 34 years old, and I never thought I'd have to call the police on my own sister. But that night, standing outside my beach house in Malibu, watching red and blue lights reflect off the ocean waves, I realized that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. It all started 3 years ago when I bought that house. I'd worked my entire adult life for it, grinding through 80-hour weeks as a software engineer in Silicon Valley, living in a cramped studio apartment that smelled like the Thai restaurant downstairs, saving every penny I could. The beach house wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. 2 bedrooms, weathered with siding that had turned silver from the salt air. A deck that overlooked the Pacific where I could watch the sun melt into the horizon every evening. The sound of the waves became my therapy, the cry of seagulls my alarm clock. I'd wake up to the smell of ocean brine mixed with the jasmine that grew wild along my fence, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd actually made it. My sister Bethany was 29, and we'd always had a complicated relationship. Growing up in our small town in Ohio, she was the golden child, the one with the bright smile and easy charm that made everyone love her instantly. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who did his homework while she snuck out to parties. Our parents adored her, made excuses for her, bailed her out of every mess she created. When she dropped out of college halfway through her junior year to follow some guy to Austin, they called it finding herself. When that relationship imploded and she moved to Los Angeles with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream of becoming an influencer, they sent her money every month and told me I should help her out because that's what family does. I did help her. I let her crash at my place for a weekend here and there when she was between apartments. I loaned her money that I never saw again. I listened to her cry about boyfriends who didn't appreciate her, jobs that didn't recognize her talent, roommates who didn't understand her creative process. And every time, I told myself it was temporary, that she'd eventually get her life together, that blood was thicker than water. Last summer, Bethany called me in tears. Her roommate had kicked her out. She'd lost her job at a boutique in West Hollywood, and she had nowhere to go. It was July, the height of tourist season, and she couldn't find an affordable place. Could she please stay with me for just 2 weeks while she figured things out? I hesitated. My beach house was my sanctuary, the one place where I could escape from the chaos of work and family obligations. But she was my sister, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. I said yes, but I made it clear 2 weeks maximum. Those 2 weeks turned into a month, then 2 months. Then suddenly it was October, and Bethany had made herself completely at home. Her clothes were everywhere, draped over my furniture like colorful flags claiming territory. The kitchen, which I'd kept meticulously organized, became a disaster zone of half-empty takeout containers and dirty dishes that seemed to multiply overnight. She'd rearranged my living room to be more aesthetically pleasing for her Instagram photos, pushing my comfortable reading chair into a corner and replacing it with a velvet ottoman that looked good but was completely useless. The jasmine and ocean smell I loved was now buried under layers of her vanilla-scented candles and whatever expensive perfume she was currently obsessed with. But the worst part wasn't the mess or the invasion of my space. It was the way she acted like she owned the place. She'd invite friends over without asking, hosting impromptu wine nights on my deck where they'd laugh too loud and leave rings on my wooden table. She'd use my car without permission, returning it with an empty gas tank and fast food wrappers stuffed in the cup holders. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd get defensive, saying I was being controlling, that I'd changed since I got money, that the old Marcus would have been happy to share with his little sister. I started working late just to avoid going home. I'd sit in my office in Santa Monica, watching the sun set through the window instead of from my own deck, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My coworkers noticed I seemed stressed. My boss asked if everything was okay. I made excuses, said I was fine, because how do you explain that you're being slowly pushed out of your own home by someone you're supposed to love? In November, I finally worked up the courage to have a serious conversation with Bethany. I sat her down one morning before work, my hands wrapped around a coffee mug for courage, and told her as gently as I could that she needed to find her own place. I wasn't kicking her out immediately, I said, but she'd been here for 4 months and it was time. I'd even help her with the deposit on a new apartment. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then she started crying, saying I was abandoning her just like everyone else, that she couldn't believe I'd choose a house over my own sister, that Mom and Dad would be so disappointed in me. The guilt hit me like a wave, cold and suffocating. I backed down, said she could stay through the holidays, that we'd figure it out after New Year's. The holidays came and went. Bethany made no effort to look for a place. When I brought it up in January, she said the rental market was terrible right now, that she was waiting for the right opportunity, that she'd definitely start looking soon. February arrived with unusually heavy rains that turned the beach gray and angry. The storms matched my mood. I felt trapped, resentful, angry at Bethany, but even angrier at myself for being too weak to enforce my own boundaries. Then in March, I got an opportunity one couldn't refuse. My company wanted to send me to our Tokyo office for 6 weeks to help launch a new product. It was a huge career move, the kind of thing I'd been working toward for years. But I hesitated, because what would happen to my house with Bethany there unsupervised for 6 weeks? When I mentioned the trip to her, she immediately jumped in, saying it was perfect, that she'd take care of everything, that I could trust her completely. She seemed so earnest, so genuine, that I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. I left for Tokyo in late March, when the cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom. The first week, Bethany sent me photos of the house, everything looking clean and normal. She texted me updates saying everything was fine, that she was enjoying having the place to herself, that she missed me. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd been too hard on her, that maybe this time apart would actually be good for our relationship. The second week, the messages became less frequent. When I'd video call, she'd answer but keep the camera pointed at her face, never showing me the house. She said she was just being lazy about cleaning, that she'd take care of it before I got home. I felt a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach, but I was halfway around the world and there was nothing I could do except trust her. By the third week, she stopped answering my calls altogether. She'd respond to texts hours later with brief messages, busy, talk later, or everything's fine, stop worrying. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake in my Tokyo hotel room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city and imagining what might be happening to my house. In the fourth week, my neighbor, an elderly woman named Patricia who lived 3 houses down, managed to find my email address through some mutual connection. Her message was short but alarming. I don't want to worry you, but there's been a lot of activity at your house. Lots of cars, people coming and going at all hours. I thought you should know. I immediately tried calling Bethany. No answer. I texted her, demanding to know what was going on. She finally responded hours later. Patricia is a nosy old lady. Some friends came over, that's all. Stop being paranoid. But I couldn't stop being paranoid. I started checking my credit cards obsessively, looking for unusual charges. I found them, hundreds of dollars at liquor stores, party supply shops, a rental company that specialized in event equipment. When I confronted Bethany about it, she said she'd borrowed my card for a few essentials and would pay me back. The casual way she said it, like it was no big deal that she'd stolen from me, made my blood boil. I had 2 weeks left in Tokyo, but I couldn't focus on work anymore. I was constantly distracted, checking my phone, imagining worst-case scenarios. My colleagues noticed. My boss pulled me aside, asked if I needed to go home early. I was tempted, but I'd worked so hard for this opportunity. I couldn't let Bethany ruin this too. I told myself I could make it 2 more weeks, that whatever damage had been done could be fixed, that it would all be okay. I was wrong. I landed at LAX on a Friday evening in early May, exhausted from the 14-hour flight and the weight of anxiety I'd been carrying for weeks. The Los Angeles air felt thick and warm after Tokyo's spring coolness, and the familiar smell of ocean salt should have been comforting, but instead it filled me with dread. I took an Uber straight to Malibu, watching the sun set over the Pacific as we drove up the coast highway, the same drive I'd made hundreds of times but which now felt like I was heading toward a disaster. As we got closer to my street, I noticed something odd. There were cars parked everywhere, lining both sides of the narrow road, some of them pulled halfway onto the sandy shoulder. Music was thumping from somewhere, loud enough that I could hear it over the sound of the ocean. My driver made a comment about some party happening. Lucky people living the California dream. My stomach dropped. We turned onto my street and my worst fears were confirmed. The music was coming from my house. My deck was packed with people, at least 30 or 40 of them, holding drinks and dancing. Colored lights were flashing from inside, visible through the windows. Someone had hung a banner across the front that said, "Spring Break Forever," in neon letters. My quiet, peaceful beach house had been turned into a nightclub. I paid the driver with shaking hands and got out, dragging my suitcase behind me as I walked toward the chaos. The music was so loud I could feel it vibrating in my chest. People I'd never seen before were smoking on my deck, grinding cigarette butts into the wood I'd carefully maintained. Someone had set up a beer pong table on my outdoor dining table, the one I'd spent weeks choosing, and it was covered in sticky puddles and crushed cans. The jasmine plants along my fence were trampled, broken stems scattered across the ground. I pushed through the crowd on the deck, people giving me annoyed looks like I was the one who didn't belong. Inside was even worse. The living room was packed wall to wall with strangers, all of them young, early 20s maybe, dancing and drinking and shouting over the music. My carefully chosen furniture had been pushed against the walls. There were drinks spilled on my hardwood floors, forming sticky puddles that people were tracking through the house. Someone had knocked over one of my bookshelves, and paperbacks were scattered across the floor, pages torn and bent, spines cracked. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, alcohol, weed, and something else I couldn't identify but made my eyes water. I found Bethany in the kitchen, wearing a sparkly dress I'd never seen before, holding court with a group of people who were hanging on her every word. She was laughing, completely in her element, the center of attention like she'd always wanted to be. When she saw me, her face went pale. For a second, just a second, I saw guilt flash across her features. Then it was gone, replaced by a bright, fake smile. "Marcus, you're home early. This is just a small get-together. We were celebrating. Get everyone out," I said. My voice was quiet, but something in my tone made the people around her go silent. "Now." She laughed nervously, looking at her friends for support. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just having fun. You're always so uptight." I said, "Get them out." I was louder now, and people in the living room were starting to notice the confrontation, the music still pounding but conversation stopping. "This is my house. I didn't give you permission for this. Get everyone out right now or I'm calling the police." Bethany's face changed then, the fake sweetness dropping away to reveal anger underneath. "You wouldn't dare. I'm your sister. You're really going to humiliate me in front of all these people." I looked around at my destroyed home, at these strangers who had invaded my sanctuary, at my sister who had betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. "Yes," I said, "I would." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Bethany's eyes went wide. She started yelling at me, calling me names I won't repeat, saying I was ruining her life, that she'd never forgive me. Some of her friends started booing me, calling me a buzzkill, an asshole. But I didn't care anymore. I was done. The 911 operator answered and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I'd returned home from a business trip to find my house full of trespassers. My sister had been staying there but had no legal right to invite people over. I wanted everyone removed from my property. The operator said they'd send officers right away. When Bethany realized I was serious, she tried a different tactic. The anger disappeared, replaced by tears. She grabbed my arm, begging me to hang up, saying she was sorry, that she'd get everyone to leave, that we could work this out. But it was too late. I'd spent months letting her manipulate me with tears and guilt, and I was done falling for it. Some people started leaving on their own when they realized the police were coming, grabbing their things and hurrying out the door, suddenly very eager to be somewhere else. But plenty stayed, either too drunk to care or too entitled to think the rules applied to them. Bethany was frantically trying to get people to clean up, as if that would somehow fix everything, but it was like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, 2 officers who looked unsurprised by what they found. Apparently, noise complaints about parties in Malibu beach houses were pretty common. I met them outside and explained the situation. The house was mine, I'd been out of the country, my sister had been staying there but had thrown this party without permission, and I wanted everyone removed. The officers were professional and efficient. They went inside, turned off the music, and announced that everyone needed to leave immediately or they'd be cited for trespassing. The house cleared out fast after that, a stream of annoyed 20-somethings filing past me, some of them shooting me dirty looks, others too drunk to care. I stood there watching them go, my suitcase still beside me, feeling numb. When the house was finally empty except for me, Bethany, and the officers, one of them asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Her makeup was smeared from crying, her sparkly dress suddenly looking cheap and desperate in the harsh overhead lights. She looked young and lost and scared, and for a moment I felt that familiar pull of guilt, the instinct to protect her that had been drilled into me since childhood. But then I looked around at my destroyed home, at the stains on my floors, the broken bookshelf, the cigarette burns on my deck railing, at the violation of my space, my trust, my boundaries, at the months of manipulation and lies and taking advantage of my kindness. And I realized that protecting Bethany had never helped her. It had only enabled her to keep making the same mistakes, to keep hurting people, to keep avoiding the consequences of her actions. No, I told the officer. No charges. But I want her out of my house tonight. Bethany started crying harder, saying she had nowhere to go, that I couldn't just throw her out on the street. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, gently suggested that Bethany call a friend to pick her up. Bethany pulled out her phone with shaking hands and made a call. 20 minutes later, one of her friends arrived, a girl I vaguely recognized from the party. They loaded Bethany's things into the car, which took 3 trips because apparently she'd accumulated a lot of stuff during her stay. Before she left, Bethany turned to me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice bitter. "You got your precious house back. I hope it keeps you warm at night, since you obviously care about it more than your own family." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I watched her drive away, the taillights disappearing down the coast highway, and then I was alone. The officers left after making sure I was okay and giving me a case number for my records. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of the party, and felt the weight of everything crash over me. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, emotionally drained, and my home looked like a war zone. I wanted to cry, but I was too tired even for that. I spent the entire weekend cleaning. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees, trying to get out stains that had set into the wood. I threw away broken items, made lists of things that needed to be replaced or repaired. I found cigarette burns on my couch, a crack in my coffee table, a mysterious stain on my bedroom carpet that I didn't even want to think about. The deck railing would need to be sanded and refinished. The jasmine plants were mostly dead, their stems snapped and leaves brown. But slowly, room by room, I reclaimed my space. I opened all the windows, letting the ocean breeze blow through and carry away the smell of the party. I replanted the jasmine, hoping some of it might survive. I rearranged the furniture back to how I liked it, putting my reading chair in its proper place by the window. I threw away all of Bethany's vanilla candles and bought new ones that smelled like sea salt and driftwood. By Sunday evening, the house was starting to feel like mine again. I sat on my deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, listening to the waves crash against the shore, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The aftermath wasn't easy. My parents called, furious with me for abandoning Bethany and calling the police on her. They didn't want to hear about the party, the damage, the months of boundary violations. All they saw was their golden child being hurt by her cruel older brother. I tried to explain, but eventually I realized they weren't interested in understanding. They wanted me to apologize, to take Bethany back, to keep enabling her. When I refused, they stopped calling. That hurt more than I expected. I'd always known my parents favored Bethany, but I'd thought they'd at least try to see my side. The silence from them felt like a rejection, like I was being punished for finally standing up for myself. There were nights when I'd sit on my deck, phone in hand, wanting to call them and apologize just to have my family back. But I didn't, because I knew that apologizing would mean going back to the way things were, and I couldn't do that anymore. Bethany tried to contact me a few times in the weeks after. First, angry texts calling me every name she could think of. Then, apologetic messages saying she understood why I was upset and wanted to make things right. Then, manipulative ones saying she was struggling and needed help and I was the only one who could save her. I didn't respond to any of them. Eventually, they stopped. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved in with the friend who picked her up that night, that she'd found a new job, that she was doing okay. Part of me was relieved. Part of me felt guilty for feeling relieved. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have given her another chance, if a good brother would have handled things differently. But then I'd look around at my peaceful home, at the space I'd worked so hard for and finally head back, and I knew I'd made the right choice. Months passed. Summer arrived, bringing perfect beach weather and tourists who crowded the coast highway. I started actually enjoying my house again, having friends over for barbecues on the deck, reading on my chair by the window, swimming in the ocean before work. The jasmine came back, stronger than before, filling the air with its sweet scent. I got a promotion at work, partly because I was no longer constantly stressed and distracted. Life started to feel good again. Then one day in August, almost 4 months after that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Bethany. She said she was in therapy, working on herself, and her therapist had suggested she reach out to make amends to people she'd hurt. She said she was sorry for everything, that she understood now how badly she'd treated me, that she didn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know she was trying to be better. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the boundary I'd established and not let her back in. Part of me wanted to respond with anger, to list all the ways she'd hurt me and make sure she understood the full extent of the damage. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being angry, tired of the family drama, tired of carrying around all this resentment. I wrote back, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm not ready to have you back in my life right now, but I hope therapy helps you. I genuinely want you to be happy and healthy, but I need to protect my own peace. I hope you can understand that. She responded almost immediately, I do understand. Thank you for responding. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. That was 3 months ago. We haven't spoken since. I don't know if we ever will or if our relationship can be repaired, or if I even want it to be. What I do know is that I'm okay with the uncertainty. I'm okay with having boundaries, even if they cost me relationships. I'm okay with choosing my own peace over family obligation. My parents still aren't speaking to me, and that hurts. But I've built a chosen family of friends who respect me, who celebrate my successes, who show up when I need them. I've learned that blood relation doesn't automatically entitle someone to a place in your life, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions, that protecting yourself isn't selfish. I still live in my beach house, and I still love it. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of waves and the smell of jasmine and ocean salt. Every evening, I sit on my deck and watch the sunset, grateful for the space that's truly mine. The house isn't just a building anymore. It's a symbol of everything I worked for, everything I almost lost, and everything I fought to keep. Sometimes, when I'm sitting there watching the sun sink into the Pacific, I think about that night with the police lights reflecting off the water. I think about how scared I was to finally stand up to Bethany, how guilty I felt, how much easier it would have been to just let it go like I always had before. And I'm grateful that I didn't, because that night, standing outside my house watching strangers file out, I didn't just reclaim my home. I reclaimed myself. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate you sticking with me through all of it. If this resonated with you, if you've ever struggled with setting boundaries with family or felt guilty for putting yourself first, leave a comment saying, I'm with you until the end, so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you found value in hearing my experience, I'd really appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this, more moments of struggle and growth and learning to choose yourself, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. There's another story waiting for you right now, one that might speak to you just as much as this one did. Thanks again for being here.